Moscow. This mule from the south. I'm the one they call me Sam. But in a clever sort of way, this mule could be working, waiting, learning, and planning. Hey, I can heal the sick and raise the dead.
Welcome back to Animal Songs, a story set to music, written and performed by Jamie Holcomb. One of the strange features of the world is the intermediary positions between psycholinguistic areas that develop out of the geography. The Silk Road passed through mountains and deserts, disclosing countless communities of distinctly different peoples, all in what we would today simply refer to as parts of China or Central Asia. There are so many different nations in those wide steppe lands that those loosely drawn national borders do not hardly account for the enormous diversity. But then again, everything becomes more complex the farther you zoom into its particulars. From all those interlacing threads, there sprout timbres. Every nation has its own long-necked lute. Looks like I've got relatives all over the world. Sprouting tall, the ash plant grows, beanstalk reaching higher, beyond the misty shroud. Yarsanism. Quail. One of the strange features of Piro Bay is how close the mountains are to the ocean. The terrain is extremely diverse for such a small space. From the heat of the cypress-shadowed shore, the ground rises, unfolds. Like a tidal wave, the land rolls upward into colder climes, and Piro Bay becomes the icy peaks of the Koran Mountains, where the king's palace hides. Pinocchio Sinwarshaw had expressed his desire to make the trip alone, but the crew of the SS Enterprise was one body, they explained. Besides, it was Ruby, they agreed, who should make the appeal to His Majesty, as it was her poor beloved boy who would be the object of the quest, for whom every knight in the king's army would search the land of old Pierrot. So Geppetto Sinwarshaw saddled his mule, Pinocchio, a name he'd bestowed on his equine companion out of affection in his son's absence. And he hitched this worthy steed to the rickety cart he used to haul his meat to market. Ruby, Violet, Frida, and Frederick would ride in the cart, while Geppetto would mount Pinocchio, and the human Pinocchio would guide them all as the head of the party. Crystal and Starla, given the severity of the mountain climate, would reluctantly mind Warshaw Manor, as they'd cutely dubbed the dilapidated pig farm. "Come on, we can play with the piglets," Crystal said to Starla. The little girl had tears in her eyes as she stood on the threshold of the house, watching the adventurers prepare. Violet and Frida were loading the cart with the squiggle-patterned Pierrot blankets of various colors, the blankets which had served the crew as beds overnight and would now protect them from the mountain air. "But what if he trips?" said Starla, a child's non-sequitur produced from the secret knittings of her curious mind. Starla ran to the curled cypress in the front yard. "Baby," said Crystal, "don't get lost." She shined sea-glass eyes on her sister, sitting in the mule cart, and quickly looked away from her dark, reflected gaze. Starla ran to the cypress, and she grabbed one of the lower branches and tugged. Crystal crossed the yard, as did Pinocchio Sinwarshaw, who had been watching from behind the mule. As her mother lifted her and pried her fingers from the cypress branch, Starla turned to Warshaw and repeated herself, "He'll trip." "I think she's trying to get you a walking stick," said Crystal. She gave him a gentle smile. "It would be safer." The cypress is much too weak, I think," said Warshaw, "but it is an excellent idea." He tousled the girl's hair. In Pierrot, the old man's voice called, "Want your grandpa's cane?" Bow-legged Geppetto hobbled to the porch, disappeared inside, and returned instantly with an ordinary curled cane. The wood was slightly red-tinted. The handle was worn with century-old palm oil. "Why don't you use it?" Pinocchio said to his old man as he extended him the stick. "Bah," said Geppetto, waving his hand dismissively. "Start using one of those. Pretty soon you become one." He crooked his back and mimed a three-legged shuffle to Starla's delight. Old men and little children speak the same language. Smiling now, Geppetto straightened himself with a crack. "Your mother kept it," reminded her of her father, "and it's just been sitting between the umbrellas. Might come in handy up there." He doffed his cap to the ladies, and he said some words which everyone understood through their warm tone. Then he returned to the mule cart. "Well," said Pinocchio. He manipulated the red cane, inspecting the striations along its length, the natural patterns in its grain. "Good thinking, my dear." Starla hugged his long beanstalk legs. "Don't trip." Crystal glanced into his olive eyes before she bent and picked up her daughter. "Be careful," she said. In the cart, Frederick and Frida were spreading the blankets. "And the nice red one," said Frida to the sunset-striped fabric spread before her. "I know who'd like that." Ruby stared at the sky. There was not a cloud in sight. "Here," Frida hurled the blanket at Violet, sitting behind the mule next to Ruby. "Wrap her well." "All right," said Violet. "Ruby." He spread the blanket behind her shoulders, and she shot out an arm, knocking him back. Violet dropped the blanket to settle over her, and he slid to the opposite corner, beside the black, bristly mule tail flapping the sultry sea air. Now Geppetto had mounted his mule. Armed with his walking stick, Pinocchio strode to the head of the party. "I suppose we are off," he said. "Damnation," called Frederick. "Declare it, man. We're off." Warshaw raised his cane and pointed it forward. He marched, and Geppetto followed, tugging Pinocchio's bridle and calling, "Yeah." From the doorway of the Warshaw house, Starla waved and shouted goodbyes. Crystal watched the cart disappear behind the bushy heads of the bent trees, and the last thing she saw was Ruby's vacant stare. "Come on, baby," she said. She hugged her daughter tightly and slipped into the house. The winding road snaked through the rows of orange brick houses, and then it began to rise, a sharp incline that demanded Warshaw to push against the hard-packed earth with the cane. "What luck," he called, over his shoulder, panting. He indicated the cane, but a fish-fresh blast from the bay drowned out his voice. Warshaw realized then that for this journey, as the head of the party, he would be alone with his thoughts. He thumped and scrabbled up the incline, the cart creaking and the mule clumping behind him, until the road emerged above the hilly mounds of the treetops onto a plateau, and he stopped to stretch his burning calves. A cracky cliff face fell to the town, and beyond the dark green shroud of the trees, Warshaw could see for the first time the bed of burned-out ruins, which he briefly mistook for a graveyard before getting his bearings on the geography. A garden of blackened rubble, jagged tombstones that gaped like teeth in a giant's jaw. The cart and mule creaked and clomped to a stop behind him as he stood on the edge of the plateau, the whistling sea air wrapping him in a cocoon of silence, to stand alone inside his own thoughts, reflecting on the corpse of the shrine of Crispin. The mule snorted, recalling Warshaw to his task. He turned and saw that his father was close enough to hear him, and his brow was bent in gentle concern. "Someday," said Warshaw, stepping closer to his father. He pointed with the cane down the cliff face. "When we have solved this problem, I will turn my attention to that." "Not much left of it," said his father. He curled his lips in an impotent expression of empathy, and he shrugged and cleared his throat as a meager apology for natural happenstance. "That is where you are wrong," said Warshaw. Though the old man didn't understand what his son meant, he smiled. "Well, the monks are up here in the mountains too," said Geppetto. "Maybe you can talk with them." What Warshaw wanted to say was that the monks knew nothing, but with his fingers curled around that solid strip of wood, feeling the sturdy implement sound in his fist-gripped right hand, and looking into his father's face as the smile returned to that impotent, apologetic lip curl and shoulder shrug, Warshaw knew what to say. What he read in his father's expression and in the tightness of his fist, what he felt was a single determined head nod, and then he did speak. First things first, he returned to the head of the party and called, in the Western language, "We're off." Already the wind was turning chill, and the air was getting thinner, so that whenever the crew members drew a breath, it bit its way into their lungs. Everyone was wrapped well in the blankets, which were shaped in the Pierrot style so that they could be draped over the shoulders into a garment we would recognize as a poncho. Frito sent a gray blanket, by way of Violet and Geppetto, to Pinocchio. "Tell him it's to match his smart suit," she said to Violet. "Tell him it goes with his suit," Violet muttered to Geppetto, as he tossed the blanket onto the old man's back, and Frida did scowl at the chimera, who shrugged and turned his attention to the passing scrub brush, which was presently developing into a forest of fir trees. "I think this is for you," Geppetto called in Pierrot. Pinocchio turned back, perceiving only a dim echo over the whistling wind, and he saw his father offering the garment. He extended the cane backwards to hook the blanket up to himself. It was a smoke-colored artifact that had long adorned the Warshaw home, and as a boy it had hung over the old rocking chair in a corner beside Pinocchio's bed, the rocking chair where young Pinocchio had imagined his mother might have sat, from where she should have bent over her son to read him bedtime stories. "Hello," he greeted the gray blanket, and he draped himself in the memory as he led the crew into the alpine forest. The road continued to climb and bend through the thickness of fir trees. The only sounds were the crunching of needles beneath Warshaw's feet, appropriately booted thanks again to the artifacts of Warshaw Manor. Pinocchio's hooves and the clacking wheels of the mule cart, as well as the occasional caw of a distant crow. Augury, thought Pinocchio. The image of a desiccated papyrus text in the candlelit library shone within him, and the remembered term presently directed his eyes skyward. Far above him, an eagle circled, scanning the world below for signs of his own pursuit. As above, so below, thought Pinocchio. The memory, or anamnesis, as it was not a specific but generic, all-containing scene of the dim library beneath the earth, hung around Warshaw so that, and perhaps this was a product of the thinning air as well as the somewhat disturbed sleep he had experienced the previous night, but so it seemed to Warshaw that he was walking through the shadows of the fir trees and sitting in that dark cave at once, his cane thumping the earth and crackling the fallen pine needles, while his young fingers turned the brittle pages of that great text he had once read in the shrine of Crispin. Brother Daly's bearded face bent into the candlelight. "Where are you going?" "It's only a daydream," thought Warshaw. What would the monk make of their present quest? "I wanted to tell you," said young Pinocchio in the library. "Dragons are real." Brother Daly smiled and shook his head. He shuffled around the table to lean over the boy's shoulder, and he considered the open book as Pinocchio turned the page. Columns of indecipherable swoops ran up and down the papyrus. "That is a good one." The monk extended a hand and tapped an enormous pointer finger on the page of symbols. In the dim light, it seemed to Warshaw that the monk's hand was missing its other fingers. "Lost in the shadows," whispered Warshaw. Far down the catacomb tunnels, the cane thumped and the pine needles crunched. "I wanted to know the answer," said Warshaw. "What to do about them. I thought you would know. It's all real. You should know." The monk tapped his finger on the text. "Have you read this one?" He smiled, a warm expression adorned with sad eyes. "Perhaps they will find him, down there," said Pinocchio aloud to himself, and his voice seemed to echo in the cave. "The mountain cliffs," he said to this observation, "but the mind is miraculous. I am there, I am here. Inside I'm watching, outside I'm watching, inside." The monk tapped the mysterious symbol in the bottom corner of the brittle page. "I thought you should know." The tree line was growing thicker, shading out the sun. Pinocchio pulled his blanket tighter around himself. He looked back to ensure that Pinocchio and the cart were still following him. Geppetto waved. Inside, the cave was enlarging. It reformed into the one room of the so-called Warshaw Manor. Crystal sat in the rocking chair, a book of fairy tales, a green leather-bound book which Warshaw remembered, spread open before her. She was moving her lips, but Warshaw could not hear the words. Only dull tones rang from her subtly shaping mouth, a music Warshaw heard as if he were underwater. Starla sat cross-legged on the ground, her back against the bed, listening to her mother's voice. As above, so below floated through Warshaw's mind, a non sequitur generated by secret readings he perceived in the text. The needles crunched. He felt the cane in his hand. A new memory floated to the surface. Was it a dream? Had he dreamt about the cane? A premonition? The stories are full of them. But of course they are only stories. And yet, a dragon, a quest. Was it a scary dragon? He could hear her now, both of her, the wide-eyed girl looking up at her mother's face, concealed behind the fairy tale cover. Yes. Once more the world changed in the crackling pages of his thumping finger. A white room. No, a high-windowed cafe. Alien tables of sleek sculpted material crowded with people in miraculous dress. Coats of shining leather, riveted pants, dresses in bright otherworldly colors, stitched in geometric patterns that no man in Pierrot had ever dreamed. A drone of ceaseless chatter, one voice, like a cosmic white noise, enveloped the blank cafe. The high windows that flooded the place with crystalline sunlight, they were bordered by what at first appeared to be plain white walls, but now he could see that there were faces, a mural spread across the space depicting gray strangers, figures unknown to Pinocchio in Warshaw. His eyes fell on a long bearded visage. Then he turned to the text in his hands. Written in golden smoke-tilting letters was the phrase, "It walks between worlds." And the dream returned, the dream from, was it just last night? That place that he had been consumed, the strange cafe, so that now the walls did become blank, everything white shining. The boy sat beside him. "Hello, sir." It was Tangi, that miraculous girl, complete with her forsaken dark felt hat and long ash staff. The real lunatic Tangi stood before him. Warshaw said, "What are you?" So you found it. Warshaw manipulated the cane which lay across his lap. Hardly. I have lost more than found. But you are here, she said. You are here, and now you can deal with me. We are going to embark on a quest for that boy. The baby Todd in his red container floated just above Tangi. She turned and lay her hand flat beneath the jar as if presenting the illusion. Pickled in a heart bottle, she said. Heart bottle? You can tell by the red. Warshaw glanced at the cane in his lap, and it briefly flashed golden etchings of corn stalks and goddesses. That was all it took. He was walking through the dark woods up a sharply inclining road, his left hand pinning the blanket shut across his chest, his right hand clenching the curl of the cane. He was freezing. The cane went on thumping the earth and crackling the pine needles as if it hobbled of its own will, dragging behind it the cold, delirious Warshaw. Why? As long as he could remember, this cane had rested in the corner, on the left-hand side of the door, buried behind the black umbrellas, overlooked and unimportant. As a boy, he had once played with the staff, imagining that it was a sword. His grandfather's ancient weapon had been pried from his juvenile hand by the furious Geppetto Sin Warshaw, who'd scolded him for playing with such things. This cane had belonged to his mother's father. It was a precious remembrance and so belonged in a sacred position, untouched and unimportant, tucked away in reverence. Then what is it for? To be remembered. To be looked upon accidentally when the rains would blow from across the ocean and you'd need the practical protection of a useful tool. You would grab an umbrella, dreading the imminent sop, worrying about your soon-to-be soaked socks and the potential foot fungus they might breed. In that moment of worldly concerns, you were to remove the black wing veil and reveal the redwood cane. A moment of reflection would flood your worried mind. Magically generated by that simple object would come scenes of a world you had never known. The mysterious grandfather, recorded in household tin types and scanty charcoal etchings. That figure of legend would manifest, not hobbling but striding, his mighty staff twirling in his oak-hard fist. He'd whistle, lips pursed behind the flapping mustaches and long white beard blown over his shoulder, the tune emerging from his paper-thin lips, inaudible but somehow present, a song that embodied that lost era before you were ever imagined. Your mother would be a girl, running before him in an ancient blue dress and polished patent saddle shoes, her own stick, a twig of fallen cypress secure in her hand, a magic wand she pretended. Warshaw remembered this kind of moment when the sacred cane would reveal its secrets, and it occurred to him for the first time in his life that the entire religiosity and meaning to existence that was felt by the Warshaw family, father and son, that feeling of value and purpose in life was bound up in this cane. It means something, he whispered into the icy wind and the dark shadows of the pine trees. It means something to me. And so the redwood cane revealed itself as the key to his own heart bottle. Behind Pinocchio's ever-flapping brush tail, Violet huddled under a purple blanket. His dark hat was pulled low over his ears so that he was tucked into himself. Frederick, on the same side of the cart, the left-hand side, but scrunched at the opposite corner by the exit, wore a bright orange poncho, and he was singing, "O Gabalua, O Gabaloo, O Gabalua." He rolled sausage-thick fingers on the wall of the cart, thumping a rambling rhythm against the clatter of the cart wheels. Finally, Frida called from beneath her snow-white covering, "What is that?" "Just an old nonsense song fishermen used to sing to pass the time." "It's cold," she said. "Aren't you cold?" "Singing helps." He huddled down into his corner and went on muttering his lyrics. "I'll tell you what helps. Here." She crawled doggedly to the center of the mule cart. Come on. Frederick rose and bumbled to Frida, now sitting cross-legged in the center. She extended her left hand to him, and he took her fleshy, firm, gripping palm. "All of you now," said Frida. "There's no sense in being together if we're not going to help each other." Violet's hat turned back and forth. "I'm fine," came his muffled voice. Ruby had not broken from her dead stare. The sunset blanket sagged loosely around her, fluttering in the chill air. "Ruby," said Frida. Then she sighed and scrunched towards the girl. "Come on," she called over her shoulder, and Frederick heaved himself after her. The humps huddled close to their companions, and the warmth breathed from their bodies. They were so warm that Ruby shivered, finally feeling her reality. She slid the blanket up and over her arms. Her eyes fell on Frida's face, pouting like a plump pigeon. There, said Frida. "Everything will turn out. Frederick grumbled. I just can't understand, said Frida. Leave it alone, said Frederick. Ruby was no longer looking anywhere. Her eyes were concealed in their own darkness. She could have been looking at the splintery boards of the mule cart, or behind the party, at the envelope of fir trees in their wake. She could have been looking into Frederick's eyes, for all he could tell. She was a vacant mystery. I just can't understand, said Frida. Such a nice boy. Maybe he wasn't. Violet sat up straighter, and his knees dropped from his huddled posture to reveal his face. Maybe he had us all fooled. Don't talk about it, Frederick said. The three fellows turned to Ruby. Her eyes were still unreadable, though her head seemed to be turned to look over Frida's shoulder. As they watched, her lips began to move. Quietly, in a voice as thin as the icy mountain air, she whispered a melody. The Humps and Violet leaned closer to her, trying to hear the song over the bitter wind. Through that incessant skirl, they heard the notes, a somber, sweet tune. The Humps recognized it, for it was a children's song known to every boy and girl that had grown up along the river. For Violet, the song was new, or perhaps he was rediscovering that melody, the lilting tune that would speak to anyone. It was so simple, the innocent song of a child. What is that? Said Violet. He was looking at Frida. A children's song, she said. Ruby stopped singing. She spoke. When I was a girl, I used to sing that all the time. Frida reached out for Ruby's hand, which she finally gave to her friend. Frederick took Frida's other hand. He extended his left palm to Violet. The chimera looked into the pug-dog face of the old fisherman. His mouth was downturned, grave, and his lower lip trembled. Violet had not yet seen Frederick Hump make any expression but one of frustration. In his surprise, he let his hand lift and fall into the grip of the hardy fisherman. Remember when we caught that bass, said Frederick. To Violet's horror, a fat tear trickled down the man's cheek. Binna, Frederick sobbed, hell of a. Frida released her husband's hand to pat his shoulder. Violet and Frederick were still connected, and the chimera looked from their interlocked fingers to his own black hoof below, the keratin glistening in the deep light of dusk. I, said Violet. He looked back at the fisherman, who was now hiding his face in the crook of his other arm. I, said Violet again, but he could find no words. He remembered. Simply put, Violet remembered. He turned now to Ruby to look into her dark eyes. It seemed to him that a lantern hung above her head, and that her eyes were black holes, and her mouth opened, a black cavern surrounding three stumped teeth. I know, Violet cried. The witch. We had to find the witch. Pinocchio the mule came to a halt, and even Pinocchio the man heard the boys' shouts. It was a trick. Peter would never do this. Nobody would ever do something so terrible unless it was because of her. Warshaw, summoned by the shouts, had trekked back to the still cart, and he leaned over the edge, listening to Violet's declaration. But of course, he said, we already know as much. He winked at Violet, and raising his cane, he used the crook to pop up the chimera's hat brim. Then he marched forward, calling, we're off. Violet, in true chimera form, felt just about everything. When he glanced at Ruby, though her eyes were lost, her lips smiled. Frida hugged, blubbering Frederick. Violet almost laughed, but as the chuckle rose in his throat, it issued forth as words. I will find them. As long as I live, I will find. And then he was crying too. The really spectacular thing about this small moment, an observation which would occur to Violet only much later, was that in this tangle of peculiar feelings, for a little while, the boy completely forgot that he was a monster. This has been Animal Songs, written and performed by Jamie Holcomb, produced by Supermoon. Find us on TikTok, YouTube, or at our website, gosupermoon.com. That's GOSUPERMOON.com. You can also find our work alongside many other talented artists at looksees.com. That's LOOK-SEES.com. This concludes the Quail chapter. I wonder what spirit we will meet next. Until then, thank you for listening.
All I got to say is, glory be, the funk's on me. Do it again.